ના ના, એ તો પ્રતાપ કે છે.
કેમ છો બધા?
મજામાં.
You
તમે
guys
કેમ છો
continue. We
બધા?
will join you in a minute.
કોણ કે છે? દિનેશભાઈ કે છે?
No, I'm saying.
Oh, you are saying.
એટલે તો જોઈન્ટ એમને થોડું મોડું થાય છે ને કાયમ થોડું.
ઓકે.
તો પ્રાર્થના કરી દઈએ આપણે.
ચાલો.
વસુદેવ સુતમ કરીએ છીએ. વસુદેવ સુતમ
દેવં
દેવકી પરમાનંદમ કૃષ્ણમ વંદે જગદ્ગુરુ. શાંતિ શાંતિ શાંતિ.
ગુરુનું નથી કરવાનું?
હા ચાલો. ગુરુ બ્રહ્મા ગુરુ વિષ્ણુ ગુરુદેવો મહેશ્વર ગુરુ સાક્ષાત
પરબ્રહ્મ તસ્મૈ શ્રી ગુરુદેવ નમઃ.
પ્રતાપભાઈ કઈ જતા રહ્યા?
પ્રતાપ ના કહે ને ફોન પર છું એટલે આવું છે.
ઓહ છે.
આપણે અશોકભાઈ,
હા,
એક સ્લાઇડ થોડી નાની કરો તો નહીં તો બધી સાઈડ કપાઈ જાય છે બાજુ મારા.
ત્યાં હું કરું 1 મિનિટ. નાની તો કરી, વધારે કરું થોડી એમ.
હા, સેજ નાની કરો છું.
Okay.
આ સ્લાઇડ નથી કપાતી પણ બીજી બધી કપાઈ જશે પછી.
How about it now?
હજુ થોડીક ઓછી કરો. હા, ધેટ્સ ગુડ.
Okay.
પણ બધાને દેખાય છે?
Okay, I'm going to move this on the other side, see if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that might
આ
be.
બાજુ વધારે થઈ ગઈ છે. આ બાજુ પેલી જગ્યા બહુ.
હવે કેવું છે? બરાબર છે હવે?
ના, જગ્યા આ લેફ્ટ સાઈડ પર મૂવ કરવાની જરૂર છે.
ના, એટલે મેં લેફ્ટ સાઈડ પર જ મૂવ કરી એટલે હવે સ્લાઇડ્સ આર ક્લિયર.
પિક્ચર એમને લેફ્ટ સાઈડ પર મૂવ કરાય એટલે સ્લાઇડ ઇઝ ઓપન.
ઓકે, ઓલરાઈટ. તો મોટી થાય તો જુઓ. હવે ઓકે. ના તો કપાઈ જાય છે. તો
How is
કપાઈ જાય
that?
તો પછી નાની જ કરી દો તો પછી.
કપાઈ જાય.
ઓ મારામાં તો બધું ક્લિયર છે. મેં બધા પિક્ચર્સ લેફ્ટ સાઈડ પર મારી સ્ક્રીનમાં કરી દીધા. તો
તમે ઉપર નીચે સ્લાઇડ કરો તો જરાક એટલે ખબર પડે પછી બીજી બધી સ્લાઇડોમાં કેવું થાય છે.
ઓકે.
ના પણ આ સાઈડ ઉપરની બધી જ કાઢી નાખીએ.
હા, સાઈડ ઉપરની કાઢી નાખો તો થશે.
તો જ પછી
આજે સાઈડ પર છે તો બધી દેખાય છે બધાને એટલે.
ઓકે.
ના એટલે
હા, એ કાઢી નાખો.
Okay.
Okay, this is great.
Okay.
This is
Okay.
good.
This
Yeah.
works. That's good.
પેલું ખબર નહીં પડે છે ને.
That's fine.
It's okay.
Yeah. So, રજનીભાઈ આયા? રજનીભાઈ આવે છે?
હા આ રે અહીંયા જ છે.
અહીંયા જ છું. Sorry, huh? Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to. ગયા વખત આપણે કર્મયોગ કરતા હતા. I think we are almost finishing. There are about 4 or 5 slides left, I think. And if we want to finish that, we can do it next time. You know, but, there was not enough left in those slides, so we can probably at some point in time we'll finish that also, and we'll start the new one.
Okay.
Ilaben Smita મને કહે છે Buddhism નું, તો પછી then I started thinking about Buddhism, and hopefully it will be clear. But Buddhism is a very, very complex problem, or very complex religion. બે વર્ષ પહેલા સર્વપિયાનંદ અહીંયા આવ્યા હતા તો I drove him from Houston to Austin, and then I had a lot of different conversation in those 3 hours about different issues. One of the issues that I asked him, why is that Buddhism appears to have a more Western interest compared to Vedanta, or compared to Hinduism, especially Vedanta? Because that is clear that among the Western people, Buddhism has more attraction, and the explanation that I agree with him. I mean, he mentioned few things, and this is how I see it. See, one of the problem is most of the Westerners who are intellectual or scientists, once you talk about God, they turn you off. For them, there is no question of scientific inquiry mixing with God stuff. And Buddhism is the only religion per se where God doesn't come in the picture. Or at least the concept of God is a very, very vague concept. They are essentially agnostic in nature. Basically, Buddha was neither affirming God nor denying God. So he was not necessarily saying it doesn't exist, but he said it is immaterial, really speaking. So most of the Westerners, especially intellectual Westerners who are not fanatic about religion, tend to be attracted to Buddhism in general. That's one idea. Second, most of them have understood yoga and mindfulness, meditation and all is part of Buddhism. Most of them don't have any idea is that Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism per se. That second part. And the third part, the idea of scientists who don't believe in soul and those God and all those kind of stuff, is that consciousness, most of them are materialistic in nature. So if you think in terms of question that we talk, that Rajni asked about, are we going to talk about? So I'm going to explain that first, and then we'll go forward. So there are basically 4 different ways to look at materialism and consciousness. Most of the scientists, most of the Westerner who are more intellectually oriented and not religious kind of fanatic kind of people, they are materialistic in nature. So for them, for science, material is the only ultimate reality. Okay, keep on dividing, atom and subatomic particles and quarks, and everything goes further down and down and down, to neutrons and protons and electrons. So essentially for them, the ultimate reality of the world or the universe lies in the atom, in the material nature. On the other hand, if you think in the extreme other end, most of the religions believe there is a consciousness called God which created this material universe somehow. So for them, ultimate reality is this God thing. Whatever the God they believe, Krishna, Allah, Christ, Krishna, Ram, whatever, Vishnu, anything that we think of. For them, ultimately, reality is God created this universe and the matter is subsequent to the God. And most of the scientists will refuse to believe that. They will think it's all superstition. That's nothing but nonsense. That is how most of the scientists will believe. So some of the scientists who are more spiritually inclined have begun to think about is that there is something called consciousness. But that consciousness is not necessarily primary thing, but it's an offshoot of material nature, which is formed, which is in the brain. So for them, idea is something like this. There must be a form of consciousness which we experience day in, day out, must be emanating from brain. So they are tying this to the brain issue, and that's where Buddhism comes in the picture. And that's the reason they are attracted to that. So there are 2 diametrically opposite viewpoints, right? One is the consciousness of God, other is the material nature of the universe. There is a second theory, the middle theory is called Sankhya theory, which is that there are 2 tracks. One is a consciousness track and one is a material track. Both of them are the coexistent tracks. The consciousness influences the material nature or Prakriti. Purusha and Prakriti are essentially consciousness and material. So idea in Sankhya theory is that by being together, somehow Purusha is able to influence the Prakriti to keep on changing. So that's a second middle of the road kind of track, where both of them coexist simultaneously. And Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta, Keval Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya comes in a slightly different version. He says consciousness is the only thing real. The material nature or the material that we experience, universe that we experience, is a projection of the consciousness. It is not existing per se, but it appears to exist. just like a mirror image, that I see myself in the mirror. So I appear to exist in the mirror, though I don't exist there. So Vedanta of Shankaracharya takes a different route, is that there is only one entity called consciousness. And the material that we experience is just an illusion within the appearance of consciousness. So those are the four different ways that you can look. And I think that Buddhism has taken the route which was several thousand years old, is that there is something called consciousness that is flickering and comes and goes, is constantly evolving, constantly changing. It's like a candle that keeps on flickering. And it is not a continuous thing, but it keeps on happening again and again and again, giving us an illusion of a continuity or a stream of consciousness. But it doesn't exist once and for all. Pratap, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can. I can hear
good.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is where the idea of skandha comes in the picture. And before we go to the next slide, maybe I'll, and third, another important part of Buddhism is this, is that Buddhism tends to not be preoccupied with God, but is more occupied with moral and ethical dimension of the life. What it says is, here, if you read the slide here, it says ethical, moral, and moral code. It's a psychological system, and it's a philosophy. Religion is there, though Buddhism per se doesn't claim that they are a religion by itself. They are a combination of philosophy, psychology, moral and ethical codes, and socio-economical blueprint. So those are the kind of thing most of the scientifically minded people tend to be attracted to, because Buddhism is primarily concerned about how you live in this life, and don't worry about this God stuff that will happen down after you die or whatever. So Buddha was asked a question, and that question has been put in different ways. One was, is there a God? Buddha says, when did I say there is a God? So the next question the disciple says, so there is no God? Buddha says, when did I say there is no God? So he then either gives a yes answer nor a no answer. And the same question has been repeated in the same way. Is there a soul? He says, when did I say there is a soul? So there is no soul. He says, when did I say there is no soul? So he neither gives a yes answer nor a no answer, which is where most of the scientists are. They think there may be something that we don't quite understand, but they don't feel like God is the one that is creating all this kind of stuff. So if you think in terms of us, we say, Vaishnavism will say, Krishna Bhagwan, Krishna is the ultimate Lord, from Akshar Brahman created this universe, right? Same Vishnu will say Vishnu did this, or Shankar did it, or Father in the heaven, in the spirit, created this universe, whatever. So essentially, most of the religion will say, if there is some kind of entity or individual which created this universe, and that is not necessarily acceptable to most of the scientist people. So that is why Buddhism has attracted a lot more in Western hemisphere compared to Hinduism. And also one more, most of the people who are marginally aware of Hinduism and Eastern religion, they think of Hinduism as like polytheism, many gods, many various different shapes and sizes, some of them scary, some of them bizarre, those kind of things. So for them, Hinduism is polytheism, poverty, population, cows, curry, and caste. So that is an amalgamation of their impression. For them, idea of Vedanta, the theory of Vedanta is not necessarily something that they've been exposed to, or at least they're not aware of it. And second part that's most important is this, and I think this is the most important part. With Tibetan Buddhism, Dalai Lama, and many of the people who support Buddhism in West have created a lot of academic positions in the universities. So there are a lot of posts where in a chair of Buddhism studies in many major universities. So they create the framework and the documents and the literature which supports the Buddhist point of view. And there is not much in the same domain of Hinduism in West. So if you go to like Harvard does have these Hinduism studies and Vedantic studies and what, but Buddhism is prevalent in many, many schools. So you can actually go and study Buddhism as a course. And there are teachers, many of them are essentially American or white people who have learned Buddhism and they are teaching. But there are not many American white who have studied Hinduism and are teaching courses in Hinduism. And a lot of things are like, there are chairs of Buddhism studies in many universities. So if you want to study religion, you can actually, study those things. And not many places you can do for Hinduism. So I think, I had a brief discussion with one of the guy who comes in Madhubhai's class. Pratap and Dinesh will know who I'm talking about. The guy who, I forgot his name, Umesh. Umesh, his wife comes and his 2 kids were there in the college. Remember Umesh?
Parulekar. Yes,
Parulekar. Umesh Parulekar.
Right.
I had sent a while back, some email that I sent to all of you in the past. And he responded back to me, he said, why should we worry about this Western academician people who are writing about Hinduism? Why should we worry about that? And my response to him was this: most of the people in the West learn about Hinduism or about Buddhism because these academicians write the papers. And those papers somehow get translated in simple terms in the school curriculum. In the high school, in the middle school, about India and Hinduism. So if they write positive things, the kids who don't have much of real interest in religion will have a positive impression of Hinduism. If they write negative things, if they read negative things about polytheism and poverty and population and caste and cows and they will have a negative impression of Hinduism. And most of the children who grow up in the West tend to read negative stuff about India and Hinduism. Because the academicians who are writing, they don't have a very positive way of presenting India or Hinduism in general. So his argument is that, well, who cares what they want to say? My response to him was this: yeah, every religion has a 2 perspectives, called emic perspective and etic perspective. So when I look at Christianity, I'm looking at an etic perspective. I'm not a follower of Christianity, but I'm looking from outside in. Same way, Western scholars who study Hinduism, they are looking from outside into Hinduism. They are not following Hinduism. They are trying to understand what Hinduism is teaching. So unless you create an environment where they get a positive impression, so they can write the books and the articles which will be copied down for the school and college, they will continue to have negative impression. And I think Buddhism has done a great job in doing that part. So most of the Westerners have a positive impression of of Buddhism, but not so about Hinduism, though Buddhism has a lot of common things with Hinduism. And when I explain to someone is that Buddha was actually a Hindu, just like Christ was a Jew, they're surprised. Is that they have no idea that Buddhism is an offshoot, like Jainism is an offshoot of Hinduism. So there is a common thread that binds all of us. So they have, those things do play a big role of how they perceive Hinduism and Buddhism in general. That's the point I'm making.
તો અહીંના છોકરાઓ તો પછીથી આપણા છોકરાઓ તો આમાં જ એક્સપોઝ થવાના ને એટલે they are not going to follow these things, you know.
Exactly right. So,
Yeah.
see, most of our kids learn about Hinduism from us. Good things, what we think, whatever we think is good. But when they go out, they don't necessarily get the same information from outside. Because first of all, they have very, very superficial knowledge. Yeah, Dinesh bhai.
Could it also be that Buddhism was flourished in Japan and the Japanese in general during the time, or 70s, 80s, had a very positive impression about Japan, number one. Number two, the Japanese may have paid financial help to these people who write, universities and all that. So those two could have possibly gone toward, the balance could go towards Buddhism versus Hinduism, even though Hinduism and Buddhism is sort of came out of Hinduism, but we didn't have a positive story to tell.
Yes, it is true that Southeast Asia and Japan and China. But remember one more thing, important thing, is Japan, Southeast Asia, China, all of them don't have only Buddhism as the religion.
Correct.
Example, if I don't remember what the population of Japan is right now, but there was a study published. What people were asked in Japan, what religion they followed. If there are 100 people, 135% responded to different religions. So essentially, what they have is a combination of Buddhism, Shintoism, Taoism, and indigenous religion mixture together. So a Japanese person follows not one religion, but many religions together. Same thing in China too. So just like in India, we are Hindus, but we often don't have any problem going to Buddhist school, or Jainism and Hinduism mixed together. So most of the countries in Southeast Asia have a mixture of religion, not one religion. But you are right in the sense, is Japan being more progressive and more prosperous than India has been able to impart some of the good stuff to the West about Buddhism. You're right. But I think most of it came because of Dalai Lama's influence, though. Because of the fact is, most important fact is this, the concept of God, which is sort of called allergy to many of the intellectual, is the main attraction of Buddhism. And meditation part, mindfulness is the other part. Pratap.
Yeah, I think the main reason for Buddhism being accepted on the Western society more is it is actually touching the intellectual class of the Western society, and thereby to the educational institutions which is actually propagating the religion Buddhism more than what has happened to Hinduism. Hinduism's total approach towards Western is not marketing. Basically, they are saying, well, that is what we are. Instead, there is a lot of things in Vedantas which can be appealing to the Western society, but that has not been at all got to the Western society the way it should be, the way in which Buddhism has got to, which you were telling.
You are right. And I think that some of the scholars, remember, Prabhupada, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, Prabhupada popularized Hare Krishna movement in America, but most of the Americans have a negative view of, they view them as crazy.
Yeah.
So if that becomes the attraction for few people, large majority of the people are turned off by it. That's
I think
the problem.
because I think they were pushy, right? At the airport or any campuses, So is that the way like they pushed and gave negative effect?
Yes, it does make a difference. They view them equally. Most of the Westerners will view them as crazy, like some of the fundamentalist Christians.
Fundamental, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So they will think these are idiots. I mean, basically, don't pay attention to them.
But
That's how they will view.
But how
I think-
about oh sorry
I think-
go ahead.
Most important part is like people like Sarvapriyanand and some of the intellectual Vedantic scholars are essentially making a contribution in a way that people in general population begin to see and understand. But that takes a long, long time. It's just not one individual. It has to be many, many smart intellectual people who can present this in a more, call it in a not necessarily haphazard way, but in a more systematic way.
yeah, but then it would not attract Caucasian people, right? That much.
No, that is how you can spread it. Obviously right now it is more confined to us, but eventually it does get spread.
એટલે સર્વપ્રિયાનંદને આપણે સાંભળીએ છીએ પણ પછીથી તમે અહીંયા વેદાંત સોસાયટીમાં જાઓ ત્યારે કમ્પ્લીટલી ડિફરન્ટ જ હોય એટલે આમ કે see
That's what I mean.
what you are hearing સર્વપ્રિયાનંદ but when you go there totally different so you don't feel like to go there too much
Yeah.
એવું થઈ જાય એટલે that's what happens.
One more point is Rajneesh.
એટલું intellectual level પર કશું હોતું નથી ત્યાં આગળ.
Yeah, go ahead.
Rajneesh ji also did a lot of work for our Hinduism.
He did, but he created a lot of negative baggage too.
Problem also, but
Yeah.
he started it also, same as Hare Krishna.
Right, most of the people will have a negative view of what Rajneesh did.
Surrounding people did all the things, but then fault is the guru, yes.
Actually, the only way Hinduism can get some recognition into the Western society is by the, as you said rightly, intellectual assimilation with the Western society of the religion. Otherwise, they will continuously keep on having the same view of thinking that Hinduism is nothing else but casteism, then poverty, and just acceptance of many weird godheads. That is what the thinking will be in the Western society, unless and until it has to appeal to the intellectual Western society first. Then only it will get moved on to like the same way how Buddhism initially got accepted like that, and then it was taught over, and then because it appeals, it is a logically appeals to people in the Western society. That's why they go to that.
Right. Yeah, Dinesh bhai.
I think Ilaben brought a point, and somebody, Ashmita also brought a point, that Rajneesh and the Hare Rama, Hare Krishna did spread, but not in a way that an average American or average white man is used to. That's one thing. Second thing is, if you look at Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, they do not have 300 gods and goddesses and different, one guy is saying my Shiva is fine, somebody is saying my Krishna is fine, somebody is my Sikh is fine, somebody, different people. So for an average American, it's a confusion. So they do, and then they do not try to get into the depth of Hinduism and try to understand that it's all one. It's different form of one thing. They look at only at what is on the surface, and they say this is confusion, this is not, while the other religion has one Christ and or Buddha or Imam or Muslim, whatever, Muhammad, so that could be one of the reasons why Hinduism has not spread.
You're right. Remember that Christianity was an offshoot from paganism. Paganism was like perceived like polytheism. Basically, paganism is what? Hundreds of different gods. Greek gods, there were gods for everything that you can imagine. And they view the same kind of primitive mentality in Hinduism too. That these people are talking the same nonsense that Greeks were talking, and same thing that pagans were talking. So this is like same thing, you know. So these
Yeah.
they were talking many thousand years ago, and they are still talking in the same terms
Right.
now.
The sun god and all that good stuff.
So
So-
what is the likelihood of having somebody or one person, just like what Dalai Lama is doing, somebody like that who could talk about the religion in such a way that it's easier to understand, and people don't start making in Western society assumptions regarding Hinduism being a polytheism as opposed to monotheistic religion or all the different gods. Like આપણા ઇન્ડિયામાં કોઈ એક એવું નથી. I mean,
because Hinduism doesn't have a central authority.
Yeah.
So there is no one individual who is authority. I mean, there are 4 Shankracharyas.
Yes.
And most people don't even know who those Shankracharyas are. You know, so in essence, Hinduism is so divergent in nature that there is no one concept or one individual who has an authority. You know, like people like Vivekananda and, you know, did spread good words in the Western society. But remember, that was only confined to few intellectual people. It wasn't necessarily permeated to average person. I mean, you know, we often talk in terms of 1893, Vivekananda came to a Congress, you know, in Chicago and gave a great lecture, blah, blah, blah. You know, we talk about that. But if you go and ask, if you pass on a street of Chicago, where supposedly Vivekananda was there, and ask 100 people, who is Vivekananda? I can guarantee you,
Nobody knows.
unless that person is a Hindu or Indian in origin, 99 out of 100 will have no idea who Vivekananda was. Yeah.
Did Chitra Bhanu made any impact when he came few times to United States or somewhere?
I don't know what impression. I mean, nobody else that I am aware. There was Ramatirtha Swami also that came in the same time frame Vivekananda came. But none of them have lasting impression left. A lasting impression. I can actually tell you is that if you ask an average person of naming one individual of Indian origin that they know about, it will be Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, nobody else they will know. And actually what Gandhi wrote about Hinduism is a lot more informative and a lot more sensible than most of the Swamis wrote. You know, not necessarily in a theological idea, a deep level of theology, but in terms of practical impact that average person has. You know, most people don't want to know about Vedanta, and most people don't want to know about difference between Vaishnavi school and Kevala Advaita and all those. They don't care. They just know the basic stuff. So the point I'm making is this. We have created a negative impression of Hinduism, and Buddhism in general have a positive impression in the Western society. And the reason is twofold. One is that the concept of God is not necessarily the dominant concept. And second is that they have been able to intellectually interest people in meditation, mindfulness, and a lot of money and a lot of chairs, academic setting. All those things play a role.
એટલે તો પછી હિન્દુઇઝમ આપણા જનરેશન સુધી પછી આપણા પછીના જનરેશન કે ઇન્ડિયામાં થોડુંક રહે ચાલો ઇન્ડિયામાં પણ બહાર નીકળી ગયેલા ના છોકરાઓ તો હિન્દુઇઝમ નું જાણવાના જ નથી કારણ કે એ લોકો મંદિરમાં જવાનું નથી માનતા એ લોકો એથિકલ વેલ્યુઝમાં જ માને છે સોશિયલ વર્કમાં જ માને છે એવું બધું જ માને છે એ લોકો અને છોકરાઓને કહે છે તો પણ કહે છે કે this is more important than this.
And if you go to Swaminarayan temple, if you take your kids to Swaminarayan, I mean, I can talk, I mean, like Sachin. I mean, he gets turned up by this Swaminarayan stuff. You know, for him, the impression of religion is negative of Hinduism, more or less, you know. And I'm sure that probably applies to, you know, your kids, some of your kids too. You know, because, you know, they see this kind of primitive kind of mentality.